I thought it was just a paperwork error, until I realized the house I grew up in, the one still under my name, had already been sold by my parents, without a single word to me. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 35. I live in a quiet suburb just outside of Portland, Oregon. From the outside, you'd probably think I have it all together. A stable job in marketing, a neat little condo, even a French press I actually use. I laugh politely at the right times. I hold doors open for strangers. I send birthday cards, even to people who forgot mine. But there's something about silence that always felt louder in my family than any screaming ever could. Growing up, I was the responsible one. My younger brother, Caleb, was the golden boy, charming, impulsive, a little reckless, but somehow everything he did was endearing. When he flunked algebra, my parents blamed the teacher. When I got a 94 on a test, they asked why it wasn't 100. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just performed. Straight A's. Volunteering. Piano lessons. I became what they needed. Predictable, competent, invisible. I can't remember the last time someone in my family asked me how I was really doing. Not the surface stuff, the real stuff. I think they assumed I was fine, because I acted fine, I looked fine, and fine in my house was good enough. But the truth is, I was cracking in places no one could see. There's one memory I keep coming back to. I was 13. Caleb had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. My dad came storming in, red-faced and wild, ready to unleash hell. Until he realized it was Caleb. He paused, looked at the mess, then sighed and said, "Boys will be boys." 3 hours later, I spilled orange juice on the carpet. It was an accident, I swear. But the way my mom looked at me, it was like I'd just burned the house down. She didn't yell. She just clenched her jaw and muttered, "I don't have time for this," and walked away. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It's quiet. It's the absence of reaction. The shrug when you cry. The silence when you need warmth. The way love feels. Conditional. For years, I thought something was wrong with me. Like maybe I loved too loudly, needed too much, asked questions that made people uncomfortable. I trained myself to shrink, to over-apologize, to anticipate everyone's needs before they even asked. I became an expert at vanishing without leaving the room. At 28, I was engaged to a man named Derek. Calm, clean-cut, emotionally unavailable in the exact same way my parents were. I thought that was normal. I mistook his distance for maturity. When I cried during a movie, he blinked like I was speaking a foreign language. When I told him I felt lonely, he said, "You're being dramatic." I should have seen it then, but I didn't, because emotional distance felt like home. I remember standing in the mirror one night, brushing my teeth, looking at this woman I didn't quite recognize, high-functioning, high-achieving, and quietly, deeply unhappy. That night, I sat on the cold tile floor and cried for the little girl inside me who kept waiting for someone to notice her, and kept being disappointed. But even then, I didn't leave, because I didn't know I could. Because being the good one meant staying, smiling, enduring, even if it slowly erased who I really was. My mother always said, "Don't make things harder than they need to be." It sounded reasonable, wise, even. But what she really meant was, don't question, don't speak up, don't feel too much. I learned that lesson early. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with my knees swinging under the chair, trying to explain to my mom why I didn't want to go to Aunt Lisa's for the weekend. Aunt Lisa was cold. Her house smelled like vinegar. She said things like, "Why are you always so sensitive?" with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But my mom didn't listen. She waved me off like I was being silly. "You'll be fine," she said. "Stop overthinking." That phrase, "you'll be fine," followed me like a ghost into adulthood. It echoed in my head every time I felt scared, or overwhelmed, or unsure. It became a command, an instruction, a warning. You'll be fine, so don't make a scene. You'll be fine, so don't expect comfort. You'll be fine. So why are you crying? By high school, I'd learned how to wear a mask so well I forgot it was a mask. I smiled on cue. I played the piano in church. I tutored kids after school. Inside, I was quietly unraveling. But no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and just chose to look the other way. There was this one afternoon, spring of my senior year. I came home from school after being humiliated in front of the entire class by a teacher who said I was too intense during a debate. I walked in the door with tears still burning behind my eyes. I thought, maybe, just maybe, if I told my mom, she'd say something like, "That wasn't fair. You're allowed to care deeply." Instead, she didn't even look up from her phone. "You probably came on too strong," she mumbled. "Tone it down next time. Tone it down. Be less. Shrink. Soften the edges." I started to believe that love, real love, came only after you filtered yourself enough to become palatable, acceptable, obedient. So I obeyed. I picked a career that made sense to them. Marketing. A safe job, my dad called it. I dated men who didn't challenge me but looked good in pictures. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I ignored red flags so bright they nearly blinded me. And all the while, I was dying inside. There were moments, tiny ones, when the real me tried to break through. A sudden opinion, a spark of anger, a burst of laughter that was too loud. And every time, someone would raise an eyebrow, change the subject, or tell me to relax. So I folded myself back in, neatly, quietly, like origami, until I barely recognized the shape I had become. One Christmas, a few years ago, my father gave Caleb a new watch, an expensive one. He handed it over with pride, clapping him on the back and calling him my boy. When I opened my gift, it was a sweater, 2 sizes too big, still in the plastic. No note, no eye contact. I sat there, holding it in my lap, and suddenly felt like I was 7 again, begging to be seen. After dinner, I offered to do the dishes, like I always did. My mom didn't even say thank you, just nodded and said, "That's what I love about you. You're so helpful." Helpful. Not loved, not valued, just useful. That word stuck with me the whole drive home. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And in the rearview mirror, I saw my own eyes, wide, hollow, like someone who had just realized they were living in a house that never felt like home. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't scream or slam the door or make a dramatic exit. But something inside me started to shift. A small, quiet voice, barely audible, whispered, "This isn't love. This is control wrapped in politeness. This is obedience, not belonging." And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. People think emotional abuse always looks like yelling, slamming doors, insults hurled like knives across the room. But in my life, it was different. It looked like silence. I used to stand in the hallway outside the living room, hoping someone would invite me in. Not physically. I was always technically welcome. But emotionally, I was an outsider in my own family. Conversations floated past me like I wasn't there. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Laughter that felt like a language I never learned. They didn't call it exclusion. They called it just how we are. I remember my birthday when I turned 23. Caleb had just gotten out of rehab. Again. The whole day turned into a celebration for his progress. My mom made his favorite cake. My dad gave a toast about second chances. No one even said happy birthday to me, and I didn't remind them, because that would have made me difficult. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, a single candle stuck into a grocery store cupcake. I lit it, didn't make a wish, just stared at the flicker and thought, maybe I don't exist unless they need something from me. I started keeping a journal around then, not because I thought anyone would read it. I was the one who read it, over and over, trying to prove to myself that I was real, that my pain had weight, that just because no one acknowledged the wounds didn't mean they weren't there. The entries were raw, disjointed, confused, but they were mine. I found one the other day, written in all caps. Why does being good feel so lonely? There it was, the question I'd been carrying my whole life. Being good had been my armor, my way of surviving. But no one tells you that being the strong one means no one ever checks on you. You become the safe place for everyone else's chaos, the fixer, the calm in the storm. And if you ever dare fall apart, even a little, they look at you like you've betrayed them, like you were only ever valuable as long as you were useful. There's one more moment I need to tell you about. Something that changed me, quietly, but permanently. It was a Saturday morning, and my mom called out of the blue. No small talk. No, how are you? Just, can you come over and help your brother go through Grandma's things? It's too emotional for him. I remember freezing, my coffee still in hand, my heart pounding with something that felt like rage, but underneath, it was grief. Grief for the girl I used to be, the one who would have said yes without hesitation, who would have rearranged her life just to prove her worth, who would have shown up, cleaned, organized, swallowed every bitter feeling, and left without a thank you. But I wasn't her anymore. I took a breath, and I said calmly, no, I can't. The line went quiet. My mom didn't argue. She just said, well, I guess I'll ask someone else, like I'd failed a test. And maybe I had, but it was a test I never agreed to take in the first place. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling for a long time, and then I smiled, because that no wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. And in that tiny moment, I realized I wasn't here to be convenient, or quiet, or easy to love. I was here to be real, even if it meant being alone, even if it meant burning the whole damn mask I'd worn for decades. Because there's a kind of violence no one talks about, the kind that comes wrapped in niceness, in expectations, in, you know we love you, right? Followed by silence when you're hurting. But I'm done calling that love. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, no final straw, just a slow rot beneath the surface. 1,000 tiny moments that chipped away at me until there was nothing left to hold together. I was 32 when I moved back into the city, after Derek and I ended things, or rather, after I ended it. I remember packing my things in silence while he sat on the couch, barely looking up, as if losing me was just mildly inconvenient. He didn't ask me to stay. I didn't expect him to. We were a perfect match in all the wrong ways, polite, distant, emotionally starved. It was a relationship made of surface tension and unspoken rules, and for a while, I thought that was all I deserved. But something had shifted in me after that phone call with my mother. After I said no. It was like I'd cracked open a door I didn't know existed. A door that led to truth. Messy, painful, unfiltered truth. And I couldn't close it anymore. The first time I said something real to my parents, it wasn't planned. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind they insisted on. Like a family tradition we were all supposed to be grateful for. Caleb had just gotten another promotion, something in finance, something vague, and my dad was bragging about him like he was some prodigy. I sat there, nodding politely, cutting my chicken into perfect bites, and suddenly, without thinking, I said, "It must be nice to always be celebrated, even when you mess up." The room went still. Caleb froze, fork halfway to his mouth. My dad narrowed his eyes. My mom's lips tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, already on defense, and for the first time, I didn't backpedal. I didn't soften my tone or laugh it off. I said, "It means I spent my whole childhood trying to be perfect, and it still wasn't enough to get what he gets just by existing." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't raise you to be bitter." I looked him in the eyes and replied, "No, you raised me to be quiet." My mother stood up abruptly. "We're not doing this," she said, like the topic itself was a stain she needed to scrub off the table. But I didn't stop. Because for once, I felt something rise in my chest that was stronger than fear. It was truth. I looked at them, really looked, and saw two people who had always mistaken control for care, approval for love, obedience for peace, and I finally said what I had wanted to say for years. "You don't know me. You've never tried to. You liked that I was useful, but the second I ask for something real, I'm too much." My voice didn't shake, but my hands did, under the table, clenched tight in my lap. Caleb rolled his eyes. "Jesus, Rachel. Why do you always have to make everything about you?" I laughed. It just came out, bitter and wild. "Everything's always been about you," I snapped. "And I spent 30 years making sure you were okay, even when you didn't deserve it." That's when it happened. The shift. My mom turned to my dad and said, "See? This is what therapy does. It turns people against their families." And I thought, there it is, the story they'll tell about me now. That Rachel changed, that she's angry, that she's cold, that she's ungrateful. Not that Rachel finally spoke. Not that Rachel finally broke the spell. I stood up, picked up my purse. My mother didn't stop me. Neither did my father. Caleb didn't even look at me. I walked out, not in a storm, not slamming doors, but in the calm, terrifying certainty that I didn't belong in that house anymore. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel ashamed for wanting out. I felt free. But freedom, I would soon learn, comes with its own kind of ache. A week after that dinner, I got a text from my mother. "We're worried about you. Can you come over Sunday? Just talk. Just us. Please." The words looked harmless. Caring, even. But my gut twisted. Still, I went. Because after all that truth-telling, part of me still hoped they'd heard me. Part of me still craved what I never got. Acknowledgement. A moment of real connection. I dressed carefully, neutral colors, minimal makeup, as if I could somehow make myself more digestible. When I walked in, I knew something was off. The living room was too quiet. No TV, no smells from the kitchen, just stiff, staged silence. And then I saw them, sitting in a circle. My parents, Caleb, Aunt Lisa, and Miha. To my horror, Derek. Yes, my ex-fiancé, sitting with his arms folded like he belonged there. My heart dropped. "What is this?" I asked. My mother stood slowly. "We just want to help you." No one met my eyes. Aunt Lisa spoke next. "This anger you're holding on to, it's poisoning you, Rachel." Derek chimed in, casually, like we were old friends. "You used to be so balanced. I don't know what happened." And that's when I realized this wasn't concern. This wasn't love. It was correction. This was a carefully orchestrated ambush. They called it an intervention, but it was punishment for speaking up, for refusing to play my role. "You're isolating yourself," my dad said. "You're throwing away your family." "I'm setting boundaries," I said. "You're being cruel," my mom snapped. And then Caleb, leaning forward with that smirk I knew too well. "You always had a victim complex, Rach. This isn't new." I felt like I was floating above the room, watching a version of myself dissolve into this script they had written for me. I was the unstable one now, the one who changed, the one they all had to save from herself. And yet none of them asked me how I felt. Not once. Not a single person in that room said, "You're right. We hurt you." Instead, they said things like, "We don't remember it that way. You're exaggerating. You've always been dramatic." It wasn't that bad. I stood there, hands trembling, tears burning hot in my throat, and realized something that both shattered and freed me. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the version of me that made their lives easier. Anything else was inconvenient, dangerous, disloyal. So I did something they never expected. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I didn't beg to be heard. I looked around that room at people who claimed to love me and said, "I'm not coming back." My mom flinched. "Rachel, don't be dramatic." "No," I said. "I mean it. You don't get to gaslight me and call it love. You don't get to hurt me and demand access to my healing." I turned to Derek. "You had no right to be here." He shrugged. "Your mom called me, said you were spiraling." I laughed just once, dry and hollow. "I'm not spiraling," I said. "I'm waking up." And then I walked out. I wish I could tell you that the next day, someone called to apologize. That my mother said, "I didn't realize how deeply we failed you." That Caleb texted, "You were right. I was selfish." But that's not how these stories go. What I got instead was silence. Cold. Absolute. Confirming everything I feared. And everything I needed to know. They didn't want me back. They wanted her back. The version of me who stayed silent, smiled through the pain, and cleaned up their messes. But that Rachel, she was gone, and I was standing in the ruins of the role I'd been given. Finally free to decide who I'd be next. After the so-called intervention, I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. Not because I was scared, not because I regretted it, but because something inside me had snapped. Not violently, not loudly, more like a slow unraveling, a quiet falling apart that I had no energy to stop. I lay in bed, fully clothed, barely moving, phone on silent. The blinds were shut, food went untouched. I don't even remember the passing of time, just this heavy fog pressing against my chest. I wasn't okay, and for once, I let that be true, because pretending had exhausted me. Because grief isn't just about loss, it's about waking up to the life you never really had. I wasn't grieving people, I was grieving illusions. The illusion that I could earn their love by being good. The illusion that they would change if I just said it the right way. The illusion that family, no matter how broken, would eventually see you. I wrote in my journal again, shaky, uneven lines. They don't get to tell my story anymore. It didn't feel powerful. It felt desperate, raw, but it was a start. That week, I got 5 missed calls from my mother. No voicemails, just her name on my screen, over and over, like a ghost knocking on a locked door. I didn't answer. Then came the group text from my dad. We're giving you space, but we hope you'll come to your senses. Come to my senses. As if clarity looked like crawling back to them and apologizing for bleeding in public. I didn't respond. Then Caleb posted a photo. Him and my parents, smiling at brunch. Caption, nothing like real family. A dagger. But one I expected. Let them have their narrative. Let them pretend I just drifted. What they'd never admit is, I didn't leave the family. I left the story. And the story was a lie. But the fallout wasn't just emotional. It was physical too. My body revolted. Insomnia, migraines, sudden weight loss. I remember standing in the shower, shaking from exhaustion, whispering, "This is what breaking free feels like? It hurts this much?" Yes, it does. Because liberation isn't a movie scene. It's not a power pose with dramatic music. It's sitting in your own silence, terrified you've made a mistake, and still choosing not to go back. I started therapy again. Real therapy. Not the kind where I performed to seem put together, but the kind where I cried and cursed and admitted ugly things. Like how I hated myself for how long I stayed. Like how I resented my younger self for trying so hard. Like how I still sometimes wanted them to call and mean it. I told my therapist, I feel empty. She looked at me and said, maybe it's not emptiness. Maybe it's space. Space that used to be filled with their voices. I cried for an hour after that, because she was right. Without their expectations, their rewrites of my reality, there was room. Room for me. I started doing small things that had nothing to do with survival. Buying myself flowers, taking long walks without a destination, cooking elaborate meals just for myself. I read a book cover to cover for the first time in months. I danced in my kitchen to songs I loved as a teenager. I started writing again, not in a journal, but stories. Fiction. Things that weren't about them. And slowly, breath by breath, I stopped waking up in dread. Not every day, not all at once, but enough to know. I was still here, still soft, still angry, still worthy, even without them, especially without them. Because once the collapse passed, once the rubble settled, what I found wasn't devastation. It was possibility. For a while, my life got very quiet. No more Sunday dinners, no passive-aggressive texts, no pretending I was fine when I wasn't. Just silence. But this silence was different. Not the cold, weaponized silence I grew up with. This was stillness, gentle, spacious, mine. At first, it felt unnatural, like I'd lost something essential. But with time, I realized what I lost wasn't love. It was control. Their control over how I saw myself. Their grip on the narrative. The version of me they needed me to be in order for them to stay comfortable. Without that, I didn't know who I was at first. But that confusion, that uncertainty, it was the most honest thing I'd ever felt. Some mornings, I'd wake up with tears on my face and not know why. Other days, I felt a strange, quiet peace just from making coffee and hearing nothing but the hum of the kettle. Healing didn't look like joy. It looked like permission to not perform, to not explain, to not shrink. I started doing things slowly, intentionally. I deleted old voicemails from my mom. I unfollowed Caleb on social media. I threw out the sweater they gave me 2 birthdays ago, the one still in plastic. One night, I lit a candle and wrote a letter I never intended to send. It began like this. Dear Mom and Dad, I know you love me in your own way, but your love asked me to disappear. I filled 4 pages, not with blame, but with truth. Not to hurt them, but to release me. When I finished, I folded it carefully, held it to my chest, and then burned it. Watched it turn to ash. Watched it leave. It didn't erase the past, but it loosened something I'd been holding for decades. Around that same time, I joined a local writing group. We met once a week in the back of a bookstore, just 6 women, all carrying stories they were afraid to say out loud. The first time I read mine, a fictional story about a girl who disappeared from her family and was never asked why, my voice trembled. When I finished, there was silence. And then, one woman whispered, "That felt like my life." That's when I understood. My story was never just mine, and maybe, just maybe, telling it could be part of my healing, part of someone else's healing too. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't glowing with forgiveness and light, but I was no longer ashamed of the pain, and in that way, I was becoming whole. Healing didn't arrive like thunder. It came in inches, soft, almost imperceptible steps. Like the first time I said, I don't owe them anything, and believed it. Or when I updated the emergency contact on my medical forms from Mom to me, tiny rebellions, all adding up to a revolution. One afternoon, I passed a mirror and didn't look away. Not because I liked what I saw, but because I didn't flinch. That was new. I'd spent most of my life editing myself in reflections, adjusting posture, softening expression, making sure I looked calm, agreeable, small. But now, I just stood there, face bare, eyes tired but steady, and I thought, she's survived. I began filling my space with things that reflected me, not the version of me I'd been trained to be. Photos of places I dreamed of visiting, postcards with quotes that cracked something open in my chest, a shelf of books written by women who told the truth and didn't apologize for it. I painted one wall dark green, rich and deep and nothing like the beige of my childhood home. It felt rebellious and beautiful. At work, I stopped staying late just to prove I was dependable. I took my lunch breaks outside. I turned down projects that drained me. One co-worker, a quiet woman named Erin, noticed. She started sitting beside me during meetings, making small talk, asking real questions. One day, I told her the short version of the story. I had to walk away from my family. It wasn't safe. She didn't flinch. She nodded, said softly, "Me too." That moment, small as it was, stitched something in me. Because I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't alone. I began attending therapy weekly, not just when I was falling apart. We stopped talking only about my pain and started exploring my desires. I told my therapist, "I want to create something that speaks to women like me. I don't know what it is yet. A book? A blog? Maybe just stories?" She said, "Start. Let it be imperfect." So I did. I started writing again. Real stories, not hidden in journals. Stories where women weren't too much. Where being angry didn't make them unlovable. Where silence wasn't safety. It was starvation. And for the first time, people listened. I posted anonymously at first. A small blog, barely any traffic. But one day, a comment appeared. "I don't know who you are, but I feel like you just told my story. Thank you." I read that line 10 times. Then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was seen. Really seen. Not for how well I held it together, but for the messy, defiant way I came apart and still chose to rise. I started sleeping better, eating better, breathing deeper. There was a moment, a random Tuesday, raining hard, where I caught myself smiling at nothing. No reason, just peace. And I thought, maybe this is what being whole feels like. Not perfect, not always happy, but true. Because the truth is, I didn't rebuild the version of myself they wanted me to be. I built someone new. Someone who doesn't beg to be understood. Who doesn't perform for crumbs of love. Who walks away when the room turns cruel, even if it's filled with family. And that someone, she is not lost. She is becoming. I used to think healing meant going back. To make peace. To say the perfect thing. To finally hear them say, "We're sorry. We see you now." But that call never came. And eventually, I stopped waiting. Because closure isn't something they give you. It's something you create, piece by piece, from the life you build without them. Last fall, I got a wedding invitation. Caleb's. It was addressed only to me. Not "and guest." No note, just a printed card and a line at the bottom that read, "Hope you can come. Family means everything." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was tempted, but because I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, just a strange, hollow awareness that I was no longer part of the equation, unless I fit the role. The version of me they wanted at that wedding wasn't me. It was the mask. So I didn't go. No RSVP, no explanation, just a quiet refusal to perform anymore. And maybe that was the most radical thing I've ever done, to not defend, not argue, not justify, just live. A few weeks later, I drove to the coast alone, Oregon in October. Gray, moody, beautiful. I sat on the cold sand, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the waves, and I said out loud, "They may never understand, but I do, and that's enough." The wind didn't answer, but inside, something settled. Because I didn't need a witness. I didn't need permission. I just needed me. That's the part no one tells you. Healing isn't about returning to what hurt you and demanding it to be softer. It's about learning to stop bleeding for people who never once reached for a bandage. I kept writing. I even started using my real name. The blog grew. Slowly, then suddenly, emails started flooding in. Women of all ages saying, I thought I was the only one. And I realized my story wasn't rare. It was buried under shame, family loyalty, guilt, fear of being called ungrateful. But when I spoke it, raw, unfiltered, confessional, it made something possible for others. And that became my peace. Not revenge, not a dramatic confrontation, just connection. A few months ago, I got coffee with Erin, the coworker who once sat beside me like she knew. She told me, "You seem different now, lighter, like you finally took off a backpack you didn't know you were wearing." I smiled. I think I stopped trying to fix what broke me. Because I did, and not just by walking away, but by choosing to walk towards something else. Something that looks like sleep without guilt, boundaries without apologies, stories without censorship, love that doesn't ask me to vanish. These days, I still feel grief. It comes in waves, but it's softer now, like an old scar, tender, but no longer open. Sometimes I wonder if they ever think about me. If my mother walks past my old room and pauses. If my father rereads old report cards and feels anything. If Caleb, on his wedding day, noticed the empty chair. Maybe. But I no longer live in that question, because I'm not the daughter who bends anymore. I'm not the sister who sacrifices. I'm not the woman who needs to be rescued from her own truth. I'm the one who told it. And in doing so, I became free. I didn't get closure. I got clarity. And honestly, that's so much better.